Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
And good evening, everybody. Episode number 80 in the ongoing series. I had to reflect a little bit on this issue. Now, we all remember the NASA news release. It was back in November 2025 for their data release, their big pre-announcements. Everybody watched. They were going to release all this data for 3i Atlas, and then it was all talk, just jabber. And then they showed 4 photos that were like from July, from the Hubble, that were just little smudges on a sheet of paper. And everybody was just aghast. There were people that had specials that they were going to, live coverage, everything. But I knew it was going to be a bust. It was just going to be what NASA always does. Never a straight answer. But my comment tonight is how scripted that was. It was, if you go back and look now in hindsight, at the time it looked like they were just talking and, these 3 scientists and the lady administrator guy talking, and, it looked fairly natural. But now going back, it was completely 110% scripted. Now, and I've always said this, they don't let these scientists, especially these guys, that they don't let them in front of a camera because they might say something wrong. It's like some of these politicians, you get them off script and wow, their mouth just goes wild. The soup salad, what do you call it, verbal salad, or just saying things that they shouldn't be saying. So they don't allow these people to go off script at all, and that was extremely scripted. So everything they said, all of the talking points were well rehearsed. And I suspect too, if you look closely enough, you can be your own judge of this. It was my determination that they were reading the script. They had some talking points that they were, but they practiced this. This was a well-rehearsed, scripted release. And the talking points, the very first thing they come out of the box and said, comets are dirty snowballs. And they're just little and harmless, and this thing, and then the first thing the lady goes, and the first thing she says is that it's not going to harm Earth. Well, everybody knew that. The thing is on the other side of the solar system. But she had to get that out of the way. And then in there they had to discount Avi Loeb, who had been saying this was alien technology, potentially, or it had, all of the signatures, that it was statistically improbable that a natural object would have all of these various properties, when in fact it was acting the way a normal comet should. And then NASA comes out later with a couple of announcements, and just bland announcements saying, oh, yeah, it acts just like we expected, just like a regular comet, which it didn't. Nothing about it acts like a dirty snowball, which is their model, but it acts like a plasma discharge comet. And all of the things I've explained these before. But that's my lead-off point, is that, and remember that in the very beginning when I started the show, I said I want to every week point out some difficulty discrepancy that is going on with the world of science, standard science. Okay, so that is it. That was extremely scripted. And what are the talking points? Oh, that it's harmless, it's a snowball, that it's not coming towards Earth. There's no danger there. And that NASA is releasing all the data. The woman says, we have all of the data so that there's free and open dialogue. BS. That's absolutely the opposite, just a blatant lie, because they didn't have, if that was their data, ridiculous. But the other thing is, too, in hindsight, and I knew this at the time, is NASA went offline 2 days before this comet came closest to Mars. Now, it wasn't all that close, but it was an electrical alignment. And so it very definitely had an effect on Mars. And probably the two moons. There was probably physical damage on the surface of Mars, that they have their, Mars orbiters taking photographs, etc. And all of this data went underground. And that's when now, as we find out through Freedom of Information Act requests, not by myself but by other people, that the CIA has sequestered all of the data. You do not find amateur postings at all on the internet. Nowhere. It's been totally scrubbed. And now we have amateurs with really, really good equipment, very good equipment. And where's all of their postings, the findings that they're, the photographs? Some of them were putting up some very good photographs and making NASA look silly, because here's a guy out in his backyard with a telescope that you could, put on a desk, and an amateur that I think the guy built himself, a backyard telescope, and he had these amazing pictures and time-lapse photography, and he was showing how NASA was overexposing their photos on purpose, obviously, to just have this blob. And then when they took the pictures and the various frames that were used to build the picture, they showed that there was a lot of detail. Okay, so at any rate, enough of that. But at this point, let me just bring you up to date. At this point in history, all of the data has been completely sequestered. It's being held in the CIA. And remember that NASA was very controlled prior to 1991. But when Hale-Bopp was discovered, the nucleus of Hale-Bopp, which was literally Planet X that Robert Harrington had discovered, he had first photographed it in 1989, the first real photographs. The search for Planet X goes back into the 1980s, the Naval Observatory working under contract to NASA. Search for Planet X is literally the contract. And Tom Van Flandern, being the assistant there at the Naval Observatory with Robert Harrington, giving the impetus to go search for it, because Pluto and Neptune were being pulled down in their orbits. So something had to be down there. They knew the general region. 1989, Harrington was in New Zealand in May, June, with his 8-inch astrograph, starting to take the photographic sets, completed in 1991, in which he had enough data, seeing it with the blink comparators. That was the technique before computers for comparing photographic plates of this portion of the sky down there that you can only see in the month of May and June. Okay, and so at any rate, the point is that in 1991, the CIA came in and shut down NASA, and I saw it happen. A lot of people retired. A lot of people, they all had to sign gag orders, non-disclosure agreements, couldn't talk to outside people. Even the secretaries had to sign non-disclosure agreements. This in 1991, and so out of the CIA comes Dan Golden to put the lid on NASA, and that was his job. So why is the head of NASA coming out of the CIA? Well, that was because they had to shut down the idea that this massive object, 4 times the mass of Earth, is coming in. It's got a companion. Little did they know at that time that it was going to become the nucleus of Hale-Bopp. So it explodes into a comet. Explode is the wrong word. It's explosive brightening, let's put it that way. It's discovered by two amateurs, Hale and Bopp, and NASA knew about this for 4 years previously. But they did not expect it to become this raging comet. And they already had the PSYOP story there, crazy lady talks to alien. That woman was the wife of a guy who ran one of the CIA worldwide ops of the Skywatch. And they promised software. It's a really, really messy, dirty history of this whole thing. I describe it in my book, The Real History of Planet X, Update 2020. It's on my webpage. But anyway, that's when the CIA took over NASA. And so the NASA Tier 2 scientists were the ones, but they never had the ability to walk up to a microphone and talk. And that's why I'm bringing this up, discussing the NASA news release, because the people they chose were very scripted. And if you looked at them, you go back and look at it, they all got their legs crossed, like little Johnny in third grade that's giving a book report for the first time. That's what they looked like. Excuse me, boys and girls, but I mean, when you look at what they're putting out for you, the public, it is so pathetic, so absolutely pathetic. It's staggering that they expect anybody to believe them. And that gives rise to the hundreds, literally hundreds of bozos running around YouTube, especially, posting stuff that has no meaning at all, just garbage, and having literally almost millions of people following it. Unreal. Okay, so at any rate, that just brings you up to date. So right now, regarding 3I Atlas, all of the data is has been sequestered and is not available. In fact, they won't even admit they have data. And that was the case with Hale-Bopp, which was literally a planet. And so that's what makes me think that the nucleus of 3I Atlas is much bigger. Avi Loeb just came out with another, here's the size of 3I Atlas. And he's as much a part of the PSYOP as NASA, although they're pawns in a much bigger scheme. And of course, they have handlers that are managing their output. But isn't it interesting that Avi Loeb is the only guy on the planet who seems to be able to get data from NASA? So it's a dog and pony show. Okay, so I just wanted to mention too that I had been watching with expectations. There was a woman named Liena, Liena, Dreams. I don't know if that's her real name, but she had access to a 1-meter professional telescope that's in South America. And she was taking photographs and spectrographic data of 3I Atlas and posting it on the internet. And the last one I talked about on this show, where she says, this little comet, she was kind of laughing, won't have any effect on big Jupiter. And of course, that's not the case at all. It's going to have a tremendous effect on Jupiter, because this comet is a raging electrical discharge. And it's combining with Jupiter's electrical discharge, and that's what gave us all that weather throughout January. The 40 feet of snow in Russia, the double hurricane off the coast of North Carolina, on and on and on. I mean, stuff that you just don't see, especially in January. Hurricanes off North Carolina, excuse me. Just a long laundry list of the straight line winds that lasted for weeks. I know most of you experienced those. I did. It blew stuff all over the place. High winds, straight line winds for days and nights on end for many days. Yeah, that was the. Anyway, back to Liena. That would be I think it's a Spanish name. It's the Latin name, so Liena, Dreams. But she stopped posting. January 22nd was her last post. So, but anyway, the point is there's just no amateur posting of any kind with 3i Atlas, where there was in the beginning. But like I say, the people got shut down. Anyway, very interesting. Okay, a quick update on the Artemis launch. It's been postponed, and I mentioned this a few weeks ago because they were having the cold and the wind and other factors. They had snow in Florida, and 1 foot of snow in places in Florida. But anyway, this SLS, the Space Launch System, which was supposed to be ready in 2019, this is like, excuse me, boys and girls, 7 years later, the main contractors, you don't hear about them much when they talk about this in the news. You don't hear about the main contractors' names. It's like they don't mention them out of courtesy. I don't know. Pretty strange. But here's the problem. They have an H2 leak, which has plagued various spacecraft. Hydrogen is a very difficult fuel to manage because it's atomic size. It's the smallest atom. So it's very hard to have seals. And on a spaceship that's this big and complicated, you're going to have lots of ports and seals and excuse me, and each one is a failure point. You cannot have redundancy on a failure point like a hydrogen valve. Okay, so at any rate, here's the problem. They're trying to fix this. All of their concentration and attention is on this one problem. But do you think in a system that large, that complicated, that there aren't other problems? Of course there are, but they're being completely sidelined because of the concentration on the SLS. Now, this happened in other space programs, which I saw back in the Gemini and the Apollo, etc., where they would concentrate on one big major problem, but then there were other problems that they didn't even talk about, but were well known. Like I'll just give some examples that I've talked about that don't come up on what you call mainstream people who are discussing the Apollo launches and the Apollo program in general, and the alleged landing on the moon, etc. And by the way, when I talked about that, my official statement on the Apollo landings is that they are an unverified scientific claim, and that's precise from a scientific point of view. And I go through this whole thing where there was no verification at the time that the event allegedly happened. And that's the number one criteria. And the other way is that if somebody else can duplicate it. This is standard procedure in science. If you do an experiment like cold fusion, remember the Pons and Fleischmann deal where they claimed to have accomplished cold fusion, nobody could reproduce it. So it was a one-off, nobody could reproduce it. They couldn't say what they did, and they were very much discredited. But NASA is, let's put it this way, through all of their lunar reconnaissance orbiter and photographs and everything else, it's not appropriate for an agency or an entity to verify their own scientific claim. It's just not the way science works. Sorry, boys and girls, that's just not the way it works. And so NASA's claim that it went to the moon with the Apollo program is an unverified scientific claim. Okay, but at any rate, now with the Artemis mission, I don't know. There's other issues. Remember the heat shield issue? They've completely sidelined that. All they're talking about now is the hydrogen leak issue. And let me just put it this way. Before you put people on a rocket of this complexity, of this size, with all of the other things that have to work, you should have at least a dozen successful launches. And if there's any interim problems in there, you should fix them. And if there's any major failures, which, for example, it didn't achieve orbit, then, excuse me, then the program should be delayed until the rocket everything else is solid and reliable. But this is only the second launch with human beings. I believe the first one was, what, it was 1922 maybe, or something like that. I don't remember the exact date, where they just orbited the Earth and came back. And they had issues with the heat shield. There were the other major issues. But when you're going around the moon, this is the plan here, is they're supposed to go around the moon and come back. And I will just re-relate a story I've told many times. When I was working with the Russian scientists in the mid-1990s, they told of the story that the Russian space program, remember in the 80s they had the Venera program, the Venus, all of the Venus, they had tremendous space capabilities with very, very simple but very reliable equipment. And they had in the 1980s, while the Apollo program, in the 1970s, while the Apollo program was going on, they sent 3 cosmonauts, just like Artemis plans to do, to go around the moon, swing around the moon and come back. And these 3 cosmonauts came back extremely dead. And it was due to X-ray radiation, because they had gone through the Van Allen belts. And that's, of course, one of the major questions is how do you accomplish that? NASA has published studies in Nature magazine, and I've looked at these, and it's very deceptive, very deceptive. It looks like they've successfully sent dummies into space, and that they had sensors all over the place. But from what I can tell, they did not have X-ray sensors. On the Apollo program, they had alpha and beta particle detectors on the astronauts. Their little badge, their radiation badge, did not even register for X-rays, did not measure X-ray radiation. And so it's very, very suspicious, let's put it that way. But what is the concern now if they had, 6 flights that went to the moon, people landed on the moon, came back, through the Van Allen belt, zip, zip, going, zip, zip, coming back, and there were no problems. What's the problem now? Why did they have living with a star program that lasted for decades, literally, probably still going on in the background, trying to figure out how to get through the Van Allen belts? Why did they have that program? Had every scientist in the country working on that, trying to come up with ideas. Okay. But at any rate, the SLS program on hold, and I don't know. I'm not going to say any more other than would NASA fake it, being under extreme pressure to succeed here? Because to add fuel to the fire, to throw gasoline on an already big fire, bonfire, dumpster fire, I should say, China is competing, not really competing, they have a program which they intend to send men to the moon shortly. And so it's a big, big, big pressure. In fact, that's this new Isaacman, that's his main goal, is to beat the Chinese to the moon. As if, anyway, we'll see where this goes. Okay, talking about in previous weeks. Now, let me remind you, go back and listen to these previous weeks' shows. Go all the way back to the beginning. If you have to do one per night, right now it's number 80. If you did one per night, let's say one of these shows per week extra, it would take you about 1.5 years to go through the shows that I've already produced. And they're all very important. And when I do shows, I do them for all time. It's not like it's for this week and, I didn't listen to this week's show, therefore, no. You got to listen to all the shows. And every show has a major topic, a scientific topic. So go back and listen to all of the shows from the very beginning. Okay, just to review, a week or two ago, like I say, go back and listen to the shows. I talked about the Born of Jupiter date for 3I Atlas. Now, 3I Atlas is moving up. It's going to have an extremely close approach to Jupiter, which is already happening, but it's on its way out. And of course, I've been trying to look with some very minor equipment, but I have not been able to see any major interactions with the equipment that I have locally. But now let's look historically. The ancients talk about Venus being born of Jupiter. And of course, what Velikovsky said was that, and that's what the ancients said. He was simply recounting what the ancients said. So Velikovsky made a big mistake. He tried to explain his historical findings that he determined from historical writings, and he was an expert in cuneiform and other ancient varieties of text. And all of the countries all around the world were talking about this Venus the Comet event, where Venus the Comet eventually became what we call the planet Venus today. And of course, Venus is just a smoldering hot basalt surface. When the Russians landed on it in the 1980s with their Venera program, they found basalt. It's all recent lava, olivine, recent lava activity. And then the Magellan probe circled Venus and mapped it. And by the time it got done with the 1-year program of mapping the surface of Venus, it still had some energy left. And so they said, well, let's remap it. The entire surface of Venus had changed. It has tens of thousands of volcanic calderas. It's like oatmeal in the morning bubbling. You know, when you get the oatmeal, it gets to the state the water is, first of all, the oatmeal is sitting in the water, and then it thickens up. And you finally get to the state where it's going like this, boom, 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 all over the surface. That's what Venus is doing. It is volcanically, have 1,000 times the density of atmosphere as planet Earth. It's hot enough to melt metals. Just amazingly hostile environment. No wind, not a breath of wind at all. And it's the same all over the surface. And, so it's not due to some kind of goofy greenhouse effect like Carl Sagan or the exaggerated greenhouse effect. That was just to save the day for the ridiculous theories that they were propounding that all the planets formed at one time. No, Venus is very clearly a new planet. Okay, but the ancients talk about Venus being born of Jupiter. Well, what really happened? This object, which is the core of the comet that became the comet Venus, Quetzalcoatl in the Mayans and Incas legends, etc., the phoenix in the South American West, the dragon in Japanese lore, in Chinese, and all of this, every country in the world talks about they have their figurative name for the planet Venus. So anyway, Venus was born of Jupiter. So what happened is this object was coming into the solar system, came close to Jupiter. It takes 2 celestial objects to perform the capture operation. And what happens is it's an exchange, it's an angular momentum exchange in energy between the comet and the two-body system. So the Sun and Jupiter would have been the two-body system that captured Venus. And so visually, here you're standing on Earth, you're back in ancient times, you don't know you don't have any concept of the atmosphere or the extent of the atmosphere or outer space. And, you think that the firmament is this glass dome, this dome that sits over Earth and it rotates and they have all of these concepts, of course, which are the best they could do at the time. But what they see visually is that Jupiter brightens. All of a sudden one night it's like, oh, there's Jupiter, and all of a sudden it's brightening, and out of Jupiter comes this comet, which eventually, 600 years later, I estimate, in my books I do a calculation on the circularization of orbit due to the tail drag, and that's part of the plasma discharge comet model, the circularization of orbit from an elliptical orbit. So anyway, birth of Venus was from Jupiter. So Venus was the daughter of Jupiter, and eventually had an interaction with Mars. Jupiter was throwing lightning bolts across the sky towards Mars, etc. So anyway, there was a lot of activity going on. And according to the Kolbrin, there were multiple comets, big comets, up in the sky at the same time. And so this takes us back to potentially Hale-Bopp being in the sky at the same time as Venus. But anyway, that's another story in itself. Okay, so anyway, Venus is born of Jupiter, but it was that visual alignment, because Venus had to be right in line with Jupiter visually for the ancients to see this, or to appear that this comet came out of Jupiter. Okay, so at any rate, this is going on right now with Comet 3I Atlas and Jupiter, same scenario, where if you were an average dude back in the ancient times, thousands of years BC, looking up at the sky, you would not know that 3I Atlas was there, just from naked eye observation. You might if you lived out in a very clear and you had 20/20 vision. Maybe you'd have a hint that there was something there, but probably not. Probably not. And so, especially now, the 3I Atlas is getting very far away. Okay, so at any rate, the situation is that on February 28th, I've determined this from looking at the orbital information, and I posted this on previous shows, so you can see the orbital position of 3I Atlas, Earth, and Jupiter. And we're having a perfect visual alignment of 3I Atlas, Earth is in Jupiter. In other words, we're going to see 3I Atlas as a comet. If you had a telescope, here's Jupiter, and all of a sudden 3I Atlas is right behind Jupiter in our point of view, and between us and Jupiter, and very close to Jupiter. Okay, so if that were to erupt anytime soon, which it very likely is going to, once it's already connected to Jupiter's electric current discharge, which is the biggest one in the solar system, unless you have a big comet. So they're already connecting electrically, and certainly the Juno spacecraft is going wild with getting data, but of course all of that is obfuscated by NASA, being the Tier 2 NASA clowns that think they're top scientists and are really not. The Tier 1 science, those guys that really have gag orders, in other words, if they say one word, they kill their family or something, those guys are really trapped. And so all of this data is being completely sequestered and hidden by the CIA. Okay, but anyway, the born of Jupiter date is the 28th. And now we've got a little issue with the moon. I've been watching Jupiter every night, and just to tell you what I just have very good binoculars. And they're not good enough to really make out the comet, etc. But the problem is that around the 28th of the month, the moon is going to be right in line with Jupiter, which is going to completely obscure it from being visible. So the 22nd, which will be, let me see, 5 days from now, so that'd be, today's the 17th of February, so that'd be like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, upcoming Sunday, is the 22nd, and that's the last good day to see the sky before the moon starts to take over and obscure your view. Okay, and then from what I remember, you have to get up early in the morning to see Jupiter, and then eventually the moon comes up, and every night the moon comes up later and later, and obscuring the view of Jupiter on the 28th, which is the actual born of Jupiter date that I've designated. Okay, so at any rate, we'll see. But that would be very interesting to have another comet which would verify. I mean, this would be the best verification of Velikovsky that you could imagine. And of course, they're just In the CIA, they're just absolutely afraid of this. And the reason being, I'll explain this to you, because you think, what does the CIA have to do with a comet? That's pretty crazy. Well, it turns out that the CIA is the police force for the World Bank. The World Bank is run by the secret societies of the Jesuits. You have a whole mixture, and I'm not going to go into that. A guy who really went into this, a friend of mine, Robert David Steele. Look up his videos. They're still on the internet. He was killed because he was going public about the CIA. He was literally a CIA operative for decades, and then he went public, and that's not, they don't take that kindly, let's put it that way. But anyway, if you want to know the workings of the skull and duggery that's behind the World Bank, etc., that's the guy that will give you the straight story. Or Leo Lyon Zagami. Yeah, a guy that I've been on radio shows with quite a few times. He'll also tell you the straight story about that. So I'm not going to go into that on this show. This show is more about science, but it's important to understand this if you're going to try and understand science today. So why would the CIA obfuscate data on 3I Atlas? Because one of the primary things they don't want the public to know about is the real nature of comets, because comets come up in history too many times. And the whole issue of Venus, it's a control issue. It's a control issue. It's like in the Middle Ages, from the pulpit, the Catholic Church taught that the earth was flat. That's where that came from. Why did they do that when it was completely known amongst the intelligent rulers of the day, going all the way back to the Greeks, that the world was round? Why would they teach that it was flat? Well, it's like a mental prison for people. And so I always talk about the space program, or the shuttle accident where the teacher was killed. Remember, all the kids were watching that day, and boom, all of a sudden the shuttle blows up, and all the kids are like, ooh, space is dangerous, can't go there, only NASA can go there. And they shut down everything, no space for a long time. That was a clear message, yes, to the youth growing up in those days, that, don't try and go into space. That's NASA's flat Earth policy right there. The same as the Middle Ages, because in the Middle Ages, remember Columbus's crew thought the world was flat, and they were going to sail off the edge, and there were fire-breathing dragons, and there was a big waterfall, and there was high winds and storms, and they were all going to die. So when they met up with a storm, they were all convinced that they had reached the edge of the earth, and they were going to fall over and die. And they were going to mutiny, and Columbus somehow managed to keep the three little ships moving westerly, and eventually discovered the Americas, thinking he had discovered India. But he kind of knew, but he really didn't know that this entire piece of property that we call North and South and Central America was between him and India. He didn't know that, of course. Now we know that. Okay, so the issue here is that the Comet 3I Atlas poses a risk, and so therefore the giant psyops with NASA on one side, the white hats, Avi Loeb on the other side, and then all of these Mickey Mouse YouTube channels out there promoting, and what do they all promote? The dirty snowball comet model. Yep, and that's the flat Earth. That's the flat Earth of today. Okay, so now I'm going to dive rather deeply into a topic that maybe some of you may have heard about. It's a rather esoteric topic of the geomagnetic field of Earth. And of course, the planets have varying magnetic fields, etc. But there's a lot of really great deal of misunderstanding of this in standard science. And so I want to talk about what really causes the magnetic field, something that I discovered, and it's much different than what you would learn in this if you went to college or even grad school. And I want to compare this with a paper that recently was published. This was in just a few weeks ago, January 30th. It was published in Earth and Environment. This is a Springer Nature magazine, a journal, periodical. And the title here is Extraordinarily Long Duration of Eocene Geomagnetic Polarity Reversals. That's kind of a mouthful. So I'm going to read it again, then explain it. Extraordinarily long duration of Eocene geomagnetic polarity reversals. Okay, so what they're talking about here is the belief was that about every 10,000 years, the Earth's pole, North Pole and South Pole, now these are the magnetic poles, not the celestial poles, which is the spin axis of the Earth, the actual spinning of the Earth, but the magnetic field, which right now is up in kind of like the Northwest Territories of Canada and moving towards the actual physical North Pole. If you go back historically, it was, guess where, in the Hudson Bay, which was the location of the actual North Pole, the spin axis North Pole, prior to the last physical pole shift of Earth. So the magnetic spin axis, the magnetic axis tries to align with the actual spin axis. And that's what's going on right now. It's moving up there. It's been moving since it was first recorded in the 1800s. Okay, so the belief among scientists is that this magnetic field of Earth flips about every 10,000 years. And you have to understand that it doesn't just kind of like flip one day. What happens is it diminishes and diminishes to zero and then increases with the pole in the opposite direction, and then this reversal happens again. But it's really something that's highly misunderstood, and here's the reason why. What they do is they drill a hole down into the Earth, and what they do is they drill a hole down and take a core sampling. And usually this is done from a ship, and they go down in the ocean where the core samples, what they do then is they bring the core sample up and they determine the magnetic field polarity in the geological record. And they estimate that, okay, it took so much time to build up this sediment layer, so many tens of thousands of years per inch, etc., rate of deposition. And so therefore that's like a calendar, it's a timepiece, so to speak. And then they can say, okay, well, every 10,000 years estimate the Earth's magnetic field reverses. But what they did is in the Eocene period, which is going way back, I'm not going to go into all of the details here, but this is millions, hundreds of millions of years ago, literally. What they found is that one of the epochs, that it was about 70,000 years between the flip. And so they went back and they did a more detailed analysis, and that's what this paper is about. That during the Eocene epoch, this in Earth's geological history, there was a time when this 10,000 year regular switch of the magnetic polarity of Earth took about 70 to 80,000 years, and then they found some other ones that were as much as 130,000 years. Okay, but here is the thing. They have it all wrong, the source of the magnetic field. The general conception is that the Earth's magnetic field is due to movement of iron, especially iron and nickel, in the core of the Earth, which is molten under because of the heat, and therefore they say the movement of this creates an electric current, which creates the magnetic field. Well, it's really incorrect, because if you think about it, there's really no motion, there's no movement in this. The Earth is so compressed, there's no movement in there. There's no motion, and even if there were, the electrons are free. They're free to move. They move much faster and have the capability of moving much faster than the magna itself. And so the idea that there's an imbalance of charge that's moving as the core moves is just bogus, goofy. Okay, so at any rate, the real cause of the Earth's magnetic field is that it has a locked in the core, in the mantle, in the crust. There's a permanent magnetic field. It's just as simple as that. And then the layering, the majority of the Earth's magnetic field is plasma. It's in the upper atmosphere. The ionosphere has counter-rotating belts, electrons going westerly around the equator. In the northern and southern hemispheres, you have the mid-latitude ionospheric jet streams that are literally in the ionosphere, which are ions, positive ions moving in the easterly direction. And then around the poles, you have another set. So you have 5 current rings that surround Earth. Jupiter has 13, always an odd number, because the central core equatorial belt is electrons moving in the westerly direction. Then they alternate positive, negative, and you can see that's where it's between those bands where the fusion is on Jupiter, for example. Same way with Saturn. That's another topic. So at any rate, that is another contributing factor. That's layer number 2 of Earth's magnetic field. Then you have the Van Allen belts, which are coupled to this. You have the proton belt, and then you have the electron belt. The electrons go one way, the protons go the other way, and they are in orbit around, locked into Earth's magnetic field, and they also contribute to Earth's magnetic field. And then you have the geomagnetic field, that's the farther out, the Earth's magnetic field, which is farther out, and there it's where the solar wind comes in. It sees the Earth's magnetic field, so the protons go one way, the electrons go the other way, and that causes another current around planet Earth that is also a contributor to the magnetic field, and that also creates an electric field. It's one of the 17 local electrical batteries I talk about in my weather book. Okay, so anyway, the majority of the Earth's magnetic field is plasma. Now, let's look in the Earth itself. To have a locked-in geomagnetic field, a permanent magnetic field in iron or nickel, primarily in Earth's crust, mantle, or in the core, these had to have cured. It's the Curie temperature, named after Marie Curie, who discovered this, that when metals solidify from the molten state, you need an external magnetic field which aligns the little magnets in the iron atoms, in the nickel atoms, etc., aligns them, and then as it cools, the Curie temperature is the temperature at which they are locked in place, so they can't move anymore. And if there was an external magnetic field that held those in that direction, then that in the same in these cores that they are drilling with crystalline, they determine the magnetic field direction in crystalline structures, etc., in the core that they're drilling. As these things cooled and solidified, they had to have had an external magnetic field. Otherwise, they wouldn't form an internal solidified magnetic field. And that's where standard science breaks down. They don't understand this. That you're not going to get a permanent magnet in Earth's core, mantle, crust, unless there's an external magnetic field in that direction. So it all depends on the sun. The sun's solar wind, and the majority of the Earth's magnetic field right now is due to plasma. There's 5 layers of the Earth's magnetic field. And so I talk about this in my work, and it's one of the biggest downfalls of standard theory. So now these people are talking about the magnetic field being locked in, and they think it's just some kind of magical process where, and there again, stuff in physics just doesn't happen. If something like a magnetic reversal happens, you have to figure out why. You have to figure out why this happens. we can have temporary magnetic reversals on a daily basis. We have probably 2 or 3 per month coming from the solar wind, where the magnetic field that's carried in the solar wind is actually opposite that of Earth's, and it actually can flip our magnetic field. If it's strong enough, will actually flip our magnetic field for a day, and then we get this blast of radiation in from the sun. It can be fairly dangerous, especially if you're, say, an airline pilot and you're spending a lot of time higher in the atmosphere. It can be relatively dangerous. The amount of accumulated radiation that you can get is much higher than the rest of us normal people who live down here on the surface of the Earth most of the time, where the atmosphere is absorbing much of this solar radiation, the bad stuff, the X-rays and the UV, etc. Okay, so the end result here is that the people doing these studies don't understand what causes a magnetic field. It's not internal to Earth, and that's this is the major downfall of all standard theoretical work, whether it's planetary geology, whether it's dealing with how the planets formed or whatever, is they have to account for Earth doing this all by itself, which is impossible. Earth cannot generate a plasma magnetic field by itself for a period of thousands of years as this material cools. This doesn't happen overnight. This is not a fast process. So you needed, during that cooling process, as the materials cool through the Curie temperature, you need an external magnetic field for that entire period of time. Otherwise, this long thousands of years cooling process is not going to produce a magnetic field. You need the external magnetic field there. So just to simplify this, let's go to a laboratory. You're going to make a permanent magnet. You take your piece of iron, nickel, niobium, whatever material you're going to use, and you heat it up so that the atoms in there is basically liquid. That's what a liquid is. The atoms are moving around, and if they have a magnetic field, internal magnetic field, those little magnetic fields are moving all around. They don't align, so you have basically no magnetic field. You don't have a net magnetic field in the piece of material because all of the atoms are moving around. Okay, so now you take your external magnetic field, you build it up so you have a really strong magnetic field. That makes all of the atoms align in this molten material, iron, nickel, rare earth element, whatever you have. And then you bring it down, you cool it down through the Curie temperature. Now all the atoms are locked in that north-south position magnetically, and you have a permanent magnet. And you can work that permanent magnet in a motor, etc., for a very long time. They actually, oddly enough, wear out. The magnets eventually will, because of the working of the external magnetic field in the generator or in the motor, etc., you can actually wear them out. They have to be replaced at a certain interval. Okay, so that's how you make a permanent magnet. So if you have a permanent magnet in the Earth, then you had to have had an external magnetic field that was present for this entire cooling process. In a laboratory, you can cool that piece of material down very quickly in a short period of time, like in a day or less. In the Earth, where this material is molten and then cooling, it takes thousands of years to drop through the Curie temperature. So you need a sustained magnetic field for all of that time. So you have these people, supposedly well-trained geologists going around talking about magnetic reversals, and they don't understand the concept of how you even make a permanent magnet. Do you see how ridiculous science is today? But this is tier 2 science. This is the garbage science. And these are I would say, garbage scientists who pawn this off on the public. It gets published in peer-reviewed journals, and of course, they don't know the difference. Okay, so in review, the Earth's magnetic field. Now let me take you another step here. If you look at the planets that have magnetic fields, and this was something that was brought up to me by a guy named Stan Dermott. He was in the astronomy department at Cornell, kind of got squeezed out because he was a independent scientist. I think he's now at a university in Florida, and the head of an astronomy department there. Very smart guy, very mild-mannered, British, and trying to compete against the arrogant NASA scientists at Cornell. He is much better off at his position in Florida. But he, in a conversation with me, mentioned that there was an empirical correlation between the planets with moons and magnetic fields, and it's really true. Mercury and Venus don't have moons, they have no magnetic field. Earth has a really significant magnetic field. It's got a big moon. Mars is a minor magnetic field, and it has two little teeny moons, little asteroidal moons. Jupiter has a massive magnetic field, and it has all of these moons, entourage of moons, including 4 big ones. Saturn, the same, has big moons, and has a big magnetic field. So there's an association between the moons and magnetic fields of the planets. Well, what's causing that? Well, it turns out that the moon is, this is where my work comes in, the discharge of the solar capacitor. The moon, for example, our moon is out in that free outer space, except when it's closely aligned, but new moon and full moon. And the same with Jupiter. Its 4 moons are out in free space, so they're discharging the solar capacitor and creating a current. Io has a current sheet that actually connects with Jupiter. So that's what's driving Jupiter's magnetic field, is the planets. They're literally like planets. They're big enough to be planets. The moons of Jupiter, or Earth's moon, moving around, and that's driving the magnetic field of Earth, including the plasma magnetic field. So, at any rate, that is the cause of the permanent magnetic field of plasma magnetic field, not the permanent geomagnetic field within the Earth. But you have all of these factors, so that would tell us that the moon was part of our system all of this time when these magnetic reversals were going on. Okay, well, I hope that is informative. Go back and listen to the previous week's shows. I'm not going to repeat the 3i Atlas, the various events that are coming up. And we'll watch this closely. Coming up this Sunday will be the last good observational date for 3i Atlas actually growing extensively, like Comet Holmes. There was a comet named Comet Holmes that has brightening very regularly, but I predicted it because there was an alignment with Mars and Jupiter. And Comet Holmes is on that to the second. All of a sudden explodes into brightness. And of course, NASA says an asteroid hit it. But watch for that. And then also remember, support this. Go to the Patreon channel, patreon.com/JMCCSCI. Go to the water filter page, the jmccwaterfilters.com webpage. And my main webpage is jmccsci.com. And all of these different ways to support this show. So thank you once again, and we'll talk to you next week.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanney. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern,